All right, here we go. Hey, everybody. It's Lunch with Lincoln for Friday, July the 2nd, 2021. I'm Reed Galen, back from a couple of weeks gallivanting around the country, happily so, and wanted to say thanks to Rick and Tara and everybody else who stepped in while I was out. And as we go through the summer here, I think you'll see a rotating cast of characters coming to you on Fridays at lunchtime. I'm really excited today to have two old friends of mine on the show with me today, Greg Jenkins and Erin Dobson. They are the co-executive directors of the Franklin Project. And the Franklin Project is a 501c4 organization that is dedicated to civics education and to understanding why it is that so much of what we might be seeing today in our American political process is due to the fact that a lot of Americans don't understand how or why the process works how it does. I mean, as I think Greg might have also, we grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, so we're sort of inculcated with civics and government and everything else because Channel 4, Channel 7, Channel 9 covered Congress like many places cover state legislatures. And so, you know, we came to it probably earlier than most. But I think that what's really important about what the Franklin Project does is that I think it's fundamentally very difficult for citizens to make informed decisions on election day if they don't fundamentally understand why the process is the way it is. On the flip side, and something we've talked about a lot, is I think it's also much easier for folks who want to continually disrupt that system or disparage that system to do so because folks are left without a lot of the information they need. So before we get to that, though, Greg and I first met in January of 2000 in the snowy wilds of West Des Moines, Iowa. And I was an advanced man, and we were, well, a young advanced man at the time. I had no hair on my face. I had lots of hair on my head. And these buses roll into the Sheridan or the Marriott or whatever the heck it was. And then Texas Governor George W. Bush was arriving, and Greg was in charge of the press corps and making sure that all of the stuff for the National Press Corps went the way it was supposed to. He was director of what's called Press Advance. He would eventually rise to be director of Presidential Advance at the White House. And I was told that there would be a table in the lobby. And I said, okay. I had no idea what I was doing. And so about 20 minutes before all these buses with these very ornery reporters arrive, because they've been all over the country, there are tables in the lobby of this hotel. And they've got cookies and snacks and all this other stuff. And I'm like, oh, tables. Exactly what we need. 100 members of the press get off and go, where are our room keys? And I'm like, huh? And they're like, our room keys. Where are our room keys? And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know where your room keys are. Why would I worry about something like that? They said there'll be tables here, and here they are. Greg, who you can't tell from the picture you see, is about 6'6" tall. I am 5'10" on a good day. And he says, who are you? And I say, I'm Reed. He said, what are you doing here? And I sort of looked at, he said, I don't know who you are, and I don't care how this happened, but fix it. And he walked away. And so that was my jumping into the deep end of the pool of presidential advance, and it informed my life up to this very moment. So Greg, welcome, and Erin, and I first met also nearly 20 years ago doing a big event down at Baylor in Waco, Texas. We did a big economic summit there. Remember, it seems like a million years ago now, but in 2002, we were in a recession, and so we were trying to figure out how to do that. Both have impeccable both public sector and private sector credentials. So Erin and Greg, after that very long wind up, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
I actually thought fix it was a fairly artful way to solve the problem. And then I could go have a drink while you're fixing it.
Once I got to know you, I realized that was you being nice. So, yeah.
That was nice, Greg, on a snowy, cold.
So, Erin, why don't you take us through a little bit of the Franklin Project, what it is you guys are trying to do, and how the folks listening can get involved?
Sure. It's not hyperbole to say that our country's at a turning point, and the threat to democracy is real. we're seeing it every day play out in large and small ways, and people are concerned and they're looking for what they can do in the process. And the Franklin Project we started because we felt like it was important to increase civic engagement and encourage a deeper understanding of how the process works. So as part of that, we're building a network of organizations and individuals that can focus in on what they as a person can do in their own communities to advance democracy, to recognize the threat of autocracy that we're seeing every day play out in local and state governments as well as national governments. So that's really what the focus of the Franklin Project is.
And so, Greg, you know, what you all see is sort of beyond traditional partisanship, right? This is about every American really learning the basics of how, you know, elections work, government works. I mean, as I mentioned at the top, we grew up with Schoolhouse Rock, right? And how a bill becomes a law. Things that, you know, I was probably, you know, I wasn't even 10 years old, but these sorts of things that sort of show us how things work with a, you know, a complete but simple understanding of how these things happen, so that, you know, when we grew up to be citizens and turned 18 and could vote, that we weren't totally blind to the process. So, you know, taking what Erin said, what do you guys see you're going to do with the folks and organizations that you partner with and you recruit?
Sure, great question. You know, when we look at, well, to go to your point about partisanship, Franklin not only as a nonpartisan organization, as a 501c4, but we like to talk and think in a pre-partisan world, if you will. We like to take partisanship off the table and talk about the things that unite us. And the things that unite us is our love of how this country is structured. It's always striving to be a more perfect union. And it isn't at the moment, and it's backsliding. And our view is, and this is validated by everybody that we talk to, is that the missing ingredient is citizen participation. Over the years, citizens have sort of abrogated their role and their responsibilities to their elected leaders. And now we see the fruit that has borne, which is not particularly good. So our mission is not only to help people get a better understanding about how this country was founded, why it was founded, and their roles and responsibilities in keeping it alive, but then to activate the citizenship component. So it's a multi-step process. It's not just about education and equipping, it's about activating. And we want folks to understand that to be a more active citizen doesn't necessarily mean you have to start going to party meetings or start doing extra things beyond, you know, living your life and raising your kids and paying your taxes. It's being a little bit more involved. It's getting a little bit smarter about what's going on. It's getting a little bit smarter about how the process works and how it's not working, so that, frankly, you can ask better questions. A great big effort that we're doing this 4th of July weekend all starts with conversation. Our thesis is, our theory of the case is that all change, big and small, from deciding, you know, what house to buy, what movie to go to, or whether or not to get rid of Ferdinand Marcos and get Cory Aquino in, everything begins with a conversation. And the quality of conversations now in America is not conversation. It's shouting past each other. It's people walking into a conversation feeling like it's a winnable event, and your job in a conversation is to beat down the other person, as opposed to, well, maybe spend a little bit of time listening, spend a little bit more time learning and understanding. And once you've done that, you'll be better equipped to start to coalesce together and make and agitate for change in a better country.
I'm pretty sure that there's a lot of folks out. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of folks out there that are going into this weekend with a little bit of angst about, how am I going to talk to my uncle at that barbecue? Or, you know, I really don't want to have these kind of conversations. But if you just put yourself in the position of, I'm just going to listen to what they have to say, not going to try to change their mind, but I'm actually going to listen to they may have a point. And by conceding a point doesn't mean you're giving up on how you might feel about, any given topic. So we're really encouraging people to just have real conversations again.
So let me ask you this, because I think that, some of the folks might be listening, say, okay, well, I'm going to go see Uncle Bob at the barbecue this weekend. And Uncle Bob's off the deep end, right? Whatever the furthest depths of Facebook ugliness could be found, that's where Uncle Bob, spends his time swimming online. And so how do you engage with Uncle Bob? Let me ask you this. I don't want to say no. If you believe what he believes is fundamentally wrong, how do you continue to make sure that interaction is not zero sum? Uncle Bob is crazy and he's wrong, and I don't want to listen to him. But he's going to be there. He's going to have a couple of pops in him, and he's going to be who he normally is, even at Thanksgiving.
That's a great question, and that's the big thing that we're trying to help people solve for. On our website, we literally have tips and tricks on how to have a productive and civil conversation. And this is not a vanilla exercise.
Right.
The problem is when we go into a conversation with Uncle Bob, who's off the rails and everybody knows it, and usually he's locked up in the attic and you only trot him down for Thanksgiving to have difficult conversations that you either avoid or listen to him shout at you. The person on the receiving end tends to get overly frustrated, as opposed to, well, let's start with what we all agree on. I mean, that is one of the tips that we put out there. Is there anything that we agree on? Are there any broad objectives that we agree on? Okay, now tell me about your position. Ask thoughtful questions. Explain a little bit more, Uncle Bob, how you came to that conclusion. So this is absolutely not about trying to change Uncle Bob's mind. If you don't change his mind, don't consider that a loss in the conversation. The win in a conversation is you understanding his point of view more. And perhaps in the course of the conversation, or the one after that, or the one after that, crazy Uncle Bob starts to understand your position a little bit more. People need to come to their own conclusions. No one is going to be persuaded by somebody saying you need to start thinking this way, and all of your facts are wrong, and everything you think is ridiculous. Therefore, you need to change your mind. That doesn't work. So what does work? Turning the heat down. Relax, breathe. Don't think that this is a winnable event. Listen more than talk is the big takeaway.
Hold on, I am trying to communicate with B and Emily backstage. No, I think that makes sense. So let me ask you this: just this week, there were a couple of things that happened in some states that I thought were concerning and confusing. In Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, who had an unexpected, I think, expression of bipartisanship yesterday with President Biden in Surfside, which I thought was a good thing to see for everyone, vetoed a bill that had sailed through the Florida legislature unopposed by both Republicans and Democrats, that had specifically to do with civic education in Florida public schools. And he went on to say something, pretty like whatever it was, basically like, this gives too many options to teachers to teach, how they might think civics can and should work. That was one. And then the second one was out of Kansas yesterday, where a number of voter registration groups, including the League of Women Voters of Kansas, who've been around for a long, long time, were concerned about a bill that had passed there just recently, in which there were penalties now for quote unquote impersonating an elections official. And they are afraid that if they go out and register voters, that they could be charged under this criminal statute that the governor vetoed and the legislature overrode, saying we can't register voters until and unless we know we're going to be arrested for potentially impersonating these things, which I think puts a chilling effect on something that is not partisan, or at least theoretically not partisan, on both fronts. And so when we see this stuff, how should we respond to it? Because I know how I would respond to it, but that's probably more zero sum than what you guys are looking for.
Well, I'll take the first one in Florida, and it's absolutely confusing to me how civics all of a sudden has become teaching civics has become a bad thing. And I think it's incredibly important that we all take a step back and acknowledge that we're better citizens, not party affiliation, but we're better citizens if we understand how the process and the system work. I mean, I actually am of probably the last tranche of students that went through and had civics taught in school. And I loved my classes about that. It allowed for a lot of really interesting discussion. I mean, the teachers aren't telling you how to think. They're just encouraging you to have a conversation and have basic understanding of what your rights and your responsibilities are. And so I'm deeply confused and troubled by the fact that a sitting governor, would be against teaching civics in school.
You know, Reed, exactly what you bring up, the topical issues of the day that come up, like DeSantis and voting rights or suppression and everything else that's going on in this country. Part of the problem is that people approach these topical issues and form their opinions based solely on what the Democrats or the Republicans are telling them to think. So when you look at Florida or Georgia or Texas, you have the Republican talking points and the Democratic talking points, and their job is not to give you the full picture. Their job is to persuade you and drive your behavior. What we have on our website, for example, is here's a topical issue that's going on. Here's what the two sides are telling you. Now let's peel the onion a little bit more and talk about what the motivations might be. Now let's go a level deeper and see what they might be actually trying to get to. So they're not telling you the whole story, but we're going to give you a little bit more information. And we're not telling you what your conclusion ought to be. We're giving you a little bit more that you can base your thinking on. Arrive at whatever conclusion you're going to arrive at, but don't do it just based on what you're seeing on Fox or MSNBC or the New York Times. I think that's a really important point. The other thing, getting back to the education issue specifically, General Milley was right last week or the week before when he kind of shot back at Matt Gaetz, saying, listen, West Point is a university just like Yale and Harvard and Columbia and everybody else. And we learn about Lenin and Marx and Mao and all sorts of things for the sake of learning and understanding, not for the point of indoctrination. I went to a University of Richmond, which was a Southern Baptist school initially when it was founded. And I had a political science teacher who was an avowed, out loud and proud Marxist. And nobody thought for a second that we were being indoctrinated by her. It was all about learning about her particular view on the world. Whether we agreed with it or disagreed with it is irrelevant. But unless you learn about all the different philosophies and perspectives out there, you are a lesser person as far as your ability to form opinions and conclusions.
I think to your point on Kansas, I was just going to say on your point on Kansas is, our system of government is founded on volunteer participation, and by asking citizens to step up and take a role in the process, and to make it even more difficult and potentially illegal that someone would inadvertently make a mistake, it goes against everything that is part and fundamental of how we run elections in this country. So I recognize and appreciate the fear that the League of Women Voters in Kansas might have, in that they're asking their volunteers to go out and register people to vote, or show up at the polls to be poll watchers, and putting them in a position that is inadvertent is just wrong.
I'm sure, Reed, you and your brethren at Lincoln have certainly run across this, that the rational plurality of this country, the people not in the extreme nutbag wings on either end, they have some commonalities, right? They're frustrated. They don't know what to do. And they also feel alone, which is, if you feel alone, if you feel like you're the only person that feels this way, you're never going to be able to amplify your frustration and do something productive with it. So that's actually one of the things that we're trying to tackle on our 4th of July campaign, is one, remind people 4th of July is not about beer and burgers. 4th of July is when 245 years ago, the citizens of this country said to an authoritarian regime, that's it, enough. We're tired of going down this route. We're going to go a different direction. We need to remind people that that's what the 4th of July commemorates. And this is a great opportunity for people to kind of renew their faith in the country and their responsibility in keeping it going the way we want it to go. So what we're doing in this campaign is, frankly, we're highlighting the work of other organizations that have been in this space for a long time, to let people know it's not just Franklin. There are plenty of organizations out there, and our job is to amplify each other's good efforts so that people feel not less alone. There are plenty of places to go to get involved, and there are plenty of ways to get a little bit smarter and pick up the mantle of responsibility.
So let me ask you that about the responsibility, because I think that's like so many things. If you're given something extremely valuable for free or at very little cost or sacrifice to yourself, there's a fundamental
taking it for granted,
devaluing of what it means, right? So 245 years ago, Thomas Jefferson wrote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, right? Revolutionary words at the time, revolutionary words, in human history and political philosophy and thought, and in the concept of governance. As Schmidt likes to say, it was the idea of putting the individual above the state. But with that comes a responsibility that you actually have to show up. Now,
right.
For most folks, and this is how democracies also are supposed to work, and nothing's ever been perfect, and we can go back to Churchill and all that, is that at the very least, you got to show up on election day, right?
At the very least.
In 2020, 66% of American voters turned out in the presidential year. That means that a third of Americans decided to stay home, right? Like 50 million people decided, gonna sit this one out. Yeah. Next year, it will be worse, right? And it will vary by district and by state and everything else and by election. But how do we also convince folks that the flip side of liberty and freedom is personal responsibility, and that every one of us, atomized as we are, collectively will make the difference between, reinvigorating American democracy or fundamentally saying, I had the choice and I chose to sit home rather than participate?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that absolutely has to happen to get to overcome the inertia that people have to get a little bit more involved and take up a little bit more responsibility in keeping this country going the way that it was founded, frankly, is to understand the nature of the threat, the rise of authoritarianism. Most people in this country do not think that this country is marching towards authoritarianism. That's something that happens in Myanmar. That's something that happens in Venezuela. Well, it happened here in stark contrast on January 6th. But that's not the only time it happened. It's happening in small ways up and down the food chain at local school boards all the way up to DC. So the first step is people need to understand the threat. People also need to understand that in order to overcome this threat, you have to understand the nature of the threat and what you can do about it. People also need to understand that once this authoritarian march goes to a certain point, I mean, as everybody has heard the famous quote before, democracy dies little by little and then all at once. By the time people notice, oh, hell, this is getting really bad, history shows us it's too late at that point to do anything about it. So either we get off the couch and do just a little bit more, or we all jump in the back seat with Thelma and Louise. It's one of two ways that this thing is going to end. So yeah, I mean, so the first step is, frankly, people need to get a little bit scared. And frankly, the way we talk about Lincoln and Franklin together is that Lincoln is just genius at shining a DC-10 landing lights on the bad actors and the things that are going wrong and the march towards authoritarianism in this country. And scaring people as they should be scared, putting them on notice as they should be put on notice. And then Franklin swoops in behind Lincoln and says, now that you're sufficiently nervous, here's what you can do to stop this from happening. But the clock is ticking, folks. I mean, you got to get off the couch or kiss it goodbye. And to use Erin's phrase, this is not hyperbole. This has happened around the world time and time and time again, and we are not exempt.
Well, and Erin, as you said, well, as we know that, your namesake, Benjamin Franklin, I don't know whether or not it was real or apocryphal, as he left Independence Hall, Constitution Hall, in Philadelphia after the crafting of the United States Constitution. And, a woman walks up and says, "Mr. Franklin, what have you given us?" And he says, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." And that's the whole ball game, right? Like it's not I know. This is like blah, 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 but it's not a spectator sport. Like you got to get off your ass and actually do something about it.
And I think contained within that statement is actually a call to action to people that they do need to get involved. And it doesn't have to be, hours and hours out of your day. I think one of the things we're really seeking to do this weekend in highlighting organizations that are community organizations that anyone could get engaged with is that they see themselves as part of the solution and not as part of the problem, as we keep talking about. So it's really important that everybody see themselves within the solution. And the three organizations that we highlight, Deliberations US, Close Up, and TVW, which is the state of Washington's version of C-SPAN, all are local organizations that anyone in the community could get engaged with in many different ways. So I think it's really important that people seek out opportunities within their own communities to, just raise their hand and be like, I can do that.
Well, listen, we're going to show a video that you all produced here in a second. But before we do that and get out of here again, I just want to echo what Erin and Greg said about the 4th of July, that this is a truly American holiday, that we are unlike any country that has ever existed on the planet. And we should do all we can to preserve it and improve it, frankly. I would also say that, if you want some more information on what's going on out there, you can tune into our podcast, Lincoln Project Podcast. You can find it on all your favorite podcast channels. LPTV, Tuesday and Thursday nights with Rick and Tara, Wednesday night with Lisa and Maya. It's going to be a big week next week for us guys. The pirate ship is leaving port and steering back into harm's way. So I think just be on the lookout for a number of announcements on that front. Greg and Erin, I want to thank you all. I hope you'll come back. And for everybody here at the Lincoln Project, I want to say thank you to everybody for watching. I want to say thanks to Emily and B, everybody backstage who makes these things happen for us. B, can we roll the Franklin video, and then we'll let everybody get on with their weekend?
Erin with the Franklin Project. We've been hearing from a lot of you who care deeply about our democracy, but feel like you're alone in the fight to keep it strong. Well, you're not alone. Fortunately, there are a lot of great organizations out there that really do give a damn about democracy. This holiday weekend, Franklin is going to highlight 3 such organizations, all working in their own ways to strengthen our democracy. So this week, we celebrate our nation's independence by being ready to start a conversation, making sure you listen to others, gather your facts, share your views, and get in the fight.